morning you introduced me as an influencer, so I'm here to influence you guys. Hopefully not, or maybe God do that for all of us. How many who are here now were not here this morning? Good, okay. So that tells me I need to do a little overlapping to kind of keep these stitches going along. But I appreciate you being here. It is difficult when you're speaking to a group of people after lunch. It means that some of them will be edified and the rest will awake refreshed. And my mother, of blessed memory, had narcolepsy, which is a disease that makes you fall asleep and do some other things like that. And when I was a young Episcopal priest, she and my father became Episcopalians and joined my parish. But most people didn't know she had narcolepsy, but it was really quite noticeable when your mother starts snoring in your sermon. And but if I could really work at it and hold everybody's attention, I mean, my test was, can I keep my mother awake for 15 minutes as I ramble on? And so that was a great test. My parents became Orthodox at age 79, and my mother, the day after she died, her young priest, who was a Bulgarian, called me up. He said, "Your mother, she died like saint," and which she did. She and my dad were in a retirement center in South Carolina near Columbia, where my brother lived. And the morning of her death, she woke up. She said to my dad, "I'm going to die today." And he ignored her because he'd done it for so many years. And she persisted in saying that, such that he said, "Nancy, why do you think you're going to die today?" And she said, "God told me." And he said, "What did he say?" And she said, "He told me he was going to come take me home at about 7. And suggested that they could spend the day talking about anything they had outstanding after their 60 some odd years of marriage. Dad thought, well, that's not a bad way to humor her for the day, and that's how they spent their afternoon. And at about 5 to 7, she said, "Jim, I love you, but I have to go home," and sat down and was gone. No noted cause of death. She died because God took her as he said she would. I thought, well, that is dying like a saint. You get a whole day to prepare, to take care of the significant things you might have had with the one person you fought with more than anyone else in your life that she had known since childhood. It was a privilege to bury her from the church and to find them both in Orthodoxy. Interestingly, they were both cradle Southern Baptist in South Carolina, rural country farming people, and had this son who did all this theological training, but they were just simple people. And when they became Orthodox, their priest, when they had left the Episcopal Church to become Orthodox, their priest that my dad had spoken to called me and said, "Your dad came to see me." I said, "Yeah, I thought he was gonna. Things were getting crazy in the Episcopal Church." And Dad said, "What's the name of that Orthodox priest?" And I gave him his local priest. The priest calls me and says, "Your dad came to see me. What'll I do with him?" I said, "Well, they're 79, and I don't think you can teach so much. But get them to cross themselves the right way, hear their confessions, chrismate them, and they'll never leave you." What I wasn't prepared for was the fact that they took to it like ducks to water. Third Sunday of my dad's first Lent as an Orthodox Christian, he calls me up. He said, "Son, they brought the cross out today." I said, "Yeah, they do that on the third Sunday of Lent." He said, "I wanted to get down. I was going to make a prostration." He said, "They had to get me back up." But I'm thinking to myself, no question in his mind, do I kiss this object or whatever? Because he'd been singing, all of his life, all these songs about the cross. It's just in Orthodoxy, we do what the Baptists sing. We actually act on it. We do, kneel before the cross. We kiss the cross. I mean, it's like everything about Orthodoxy. They just took it for what it said and did it, and were as happy as could be. Visiting my parents in their retirement, little couple of rooms they retired to in a sort of retirement center, seeing the icons on their walls, boy, I sure never expected that as a child or saw that coming. But both of them died very faithful, very happy Orthodox Christians. Life is so full of surprises. You just don't know. You don't know. I think when I looked at it, I've long held the opinion that all human beings are Orthodox. They just don't know it. And, I've seen bumper stickers on cars that say Orthodox Christianity, 33 AD, and I don't like it because theologically, the church came into existence when God said, "Let there be light." It's Genesis 1:1. It says in the first chapter of Ephesians that God is gathering together in one all things in Christ Jesus. And that's what I think of when I think of my little mission, my parish church in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, that God is just it's a gathering point. And I tell my congregation that your job one is to be an Orthodox church so that there's one here when people come looking for it. Because when I was looking for it, there wasn't. So we started it under our bishop. I've always assumed if I'm talking to somebody about Orthodoxy that they agree with me, but don't know it yet. And it's that my task and I think all of our tasks is sort of like midwives, helping people get birthed to become who God created them to be, to discover the truth of their existence. And that kind of overlaps with my first talk. Shame, which is an interesting thing. I mean, the most popular speaker on shame these days is a woman called Brene Brown. She's an Episcopalian, interestingly. And her writings, my daughters all read her and just, "Oh, Papa," just love, "Have you read Brene Brown?" And I thought, I've tried to. One of her problems is that she demonizes shame. Because it's really unpleasant and people don't like it, and you shouldn't use it against other people. But she, by doing that, fails to understand, and this is clinical, it's biblical, but it's also clinical in terms of actual clinical psychological studies. There's two kinds of shame. There's a healthy shame and a toxic shame. Shame is kind of how you feel about yourself, who you are. And it's this inner feeling. Ultimately, it's a communion with yourself, a communion with God. Adam and Eve, that communion is broken when they sin, and they see that they're naked, and they feel naked and ashamed, and they hide. And that's sort of the way the dynamic of shame works. We want to hide, and we use all kinds of disguises, from clothing, pretending to be things. This is really interesting as a priest because I've been dressing funny for a lot of years now. And, my 20 years as an Episcopal priest, I was wearing a dog collar, and going around, and you get tagged a little bit, but if you put on the cassock and you're just going to go full bore, there's nothing like being dressed like an Orthodox priest in the aisles of Walmart in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Shopping with Appalachia. Actually, I was in Target, which is a different place altogether. I was in Target in Knoxville, Tennessee, one day dressed like this, and a lady next to me at the checkout counter, she sneezed. And like a Southern gentleman, I wasn't even thinking Orthodox, I just a Southern gentleman, I said, "Well, God bless you." And she suddenly turned on me and began yelling. She was yelling, "Don't you put your religion on me." And I'm thinking, I'd have brought my holy water if I knew this was going to be a question. We'd just go full schmear. But I contrast that to being in Walmart, Appalachian Walmart in Oak Ridge, and I'm dressed like this, and a guy comes up to me and said, "Are you a real priest?" I think, "Yes, I am." He said, "If I buy a cross in the jewelry would you bless it?" And I said, "Yes, I would." Of course, my second thought to myself was, attention Walmart shoppers, blessings on aisle 5, you know. But he bought the cross, and I blessed it, you know, and you discover what I love the sort of inherent religion in the Appalachian region, that I go in stores, and instead of people going, oh, he's been screaming or something, they'll come up. My sister's got cancer, would you pray for her? And that in Appalachia doesn't mean politely, yes, I will. It means now. And so the number of stores in Oak Ridge that become my altar, that I can pray now without shame. I mean, if I'm going to dress like this, I got to be willing to act like this. This is not my professional outfit for church. This is because I'm a priest. And yes, I will stand before God and pray with you for whatever. And I've had to kind of learn that. It's been a long, slow process of doing it. Shame interrupts our communion with God. It interrupts our communion with ourself, and breaks our communion with others, and makes us do strange things to hide and cover it. There's a healthy shame that is simply a signal that tells you something's wrong. You know, you walk into a room and you're dressed wrong. You know, how do you dress? I know, and I don't mean this in any embarrassment, but as we were packing to come down here, how do people dress at a Greek Orthodox event? We know how they dress for the OCA, but we had to think about that, and it's all good. You know, my wife doing that. Me, I was even concerned, wondering, clergy at the GOA, anything, are they going to wear their you know, black suits and collars? Because I see those in some photos. I called a buddy priest from here, and he said, just wear your cassock, you'll be fine. Some will and some won't, and I thought, they're like us. So that's a good learning. But you ask these questions. You don't want to not fit. You don't want to bring a wrong kind of attention to yourself. We don't like shame. But healthy shame is not a wrong thing. It's not a bad thing. It's not a sin. It's something we're born with, and it's just a signal. As important as hunger, which tells you it's time to eat, you know, as important as being tired, time to sleep. Sort of healthy shame tells you it's time to pay attention to this. And, you know, and so that's that. Then it's really, really bad stepsister, toxic shame, which is usually a product of abuse or other sorts of things. I grew up as a second child. I had an older brother who was bigger, faster, stronger, and better looking. At least that's what he said. I used to love it in high school if I dated a girl who told me I was better looking than my older brother. It was like, that was the best thing you could possibly say to me. I'm a second son. But, you know, I grew up, I was smaller, I was shorter, and so I always hated feeling like that younger brother. It was not a comfortable feeling for me. One of my earliest experiences in school was on the playground. I had to wear corrective shoes because I had flat feet. It was the 1950s, and parents would torture children over nothing. And so I'm wearing these ugly corrective shoes, and this boy I met on the playground began taunting me and calling me baby shoes, because that's what they looked like. And so I went home that day and was about a year-long pleading to have normal-looking shoes. Who wants to be singled out as baby shoes? Of course, the toxic shame in that was that this guy became my best friend. Not because I like people who torture me and bully me, but because my way of dealing with that toxic shame was to try to make a friend out of it and control it that way. I look back and think it was one of the sickest things in my life. You know, I needed to have told him where to get off and found a different friend. But we do these things. We develop patterns in our life, developed out of abuse and survival strategies that we've developed. Many of them we mistake for personality traits. You know, that we are We are the way we are because that's just who I am. Live with it. And that doesn't get us there either. I also said this morning that healthy shame is actually another word for humility. The ability to bear who I am nakedly in the presence of God is what is the best definition of humility. And that's very much working out of the tradition. To be able to bear who I am in the presence of God. And more than that, to understand that God in Christ has come down and stands on our side of the shame. I turn not my face from the shame and the spitting, it says in Isaiah of the coming Messiah. Jesus comes and stands on our side of the shame, not on the judging side, but on our side. He made himself to be sin. It says in 2 Corinthians chapter 5 that God made him to be sin who knew no sin, that in him we might become the righteousness of Christ. So he became what we are. Not that he sinned, but he took on himself the consequences of our sin. He bore our shame and allied himself with us. So he's on your side. He's the one working for you to heal you, to make it possible to have communion, koinonia, with God, with others. So, second talk, here we go. That brought you up. That was a short summary. I left out all the jokes, mostly. Nakedness is a powerful metaphor in the experience of shame. To be naked is to be vulnerable, as in having no armor, no protection. It reveals more of ourselves than we often want to be seen. In fact, it's interesting, people who do make a living out of being naked, movie actors and worse, others that way, there's a sense in which they distance themselves from themselves in the process. In a sense, it's like, objectively, you're taking pictures of my body, but I'm not there. It's very interesting. I've read a number of articles, just interviews with movie actors, male and female, who have done nude scenes. And I'm interested in how uncomfortable they are about it. They look really comfortable to me watching those scenes, but they were not comfortable. So just because we have a culture of nudity and a culture of pornography doesn't mean people really are comfortable like that. We're not. Married people, despite all that we say, frequently have a great deal of difficulty with their own nudity. That level of being that vulnerable and that seen and known by another, the intimacy of marriage is the most dangerous weapon anyone can have. I try to talk, when I've had opportunity to talk to teenagers and talking about sex and that sort of stuff when I could, and you could manage to get them to listen, was to try to talk about vulnerability and that when you violate it or allow somebody else to violate it, you lose something of yourself that is very hard to get back. You can't turn the most intimate part of yourself into a very public part of yourself and then go try to find yourself. You lost it. You can't get it back, but it makes it all the more difficult. I find it interesting, the cult of our selfies. I've taken a few today, others have with me. I mean, I'm here. Our culture of selfies is sort of this drive we have of trying to capture in a picture and then post a vision of ourselves, perhaps as we want it to be. And it's driving teenagers crazy because I've never met a teenage girl who looks like she thinks she should. Even the most wonderful and beautiful don't believe it. In the story of the Garden of Eden, the nakedness of Adam and Eve, we're told that they hid, that they tried to cover themselves with fig leaves, not very effectively. I suspect a striking element in the story, though, can be seen in how God treats all of this. I mentioned this earlier. Adam says, "We heard you in the garden and we hid because we were naked." God says, who told you you were naked? He adds, did you eat what I told you not to eat? The conversation takes an interesting shift. Adam starts the conversation by talking about shame. We were naked and we hid. God overlooks the shame and moves the conversation to guilt. That is, did you do what I told you not to do? That's guilt. And the actions of Adam and Eve, though, have consequences. They're driven from the garden because you cannot remain there in a now mortal condition. The day you eat of it, you will die. They become mortal. But as they leave the garden, we're told something important. It says, God clothed them in garments of skin. Some of the fathers got sort of heretical on this. I say fathers, like Origen and a few others, literally thought of Adam and Eve as getting clothed with flesh garments. That they had started off as like spiritual beings, like they were angels, and they fall and then have to become flesh beings. That's not the Orthodox teaching. But I could see where you might get that idea. But instead, I mentioned this morning, I tend to think of when God clothed them with garments of skin, that he put Flintstone outfits on them. You know, they looked like Fred and Wilma. Only Adam was not quite as fat yet. Hard to get fat on fruit. So there he was. But God clothes them. The fathers have many things to say about the garments. But it is the beginning of a theme that will run throughout the scriptures, becoming particularly clear when we get to the New Testament. But think of this passage from Isaiah 61, and priests should be very familiar with this, regardless of your translation. My soul shall rejoice in the Lord, for he has clothed me with the garments of salvation. He has covered me with the robe of righteousness. As a bridegroom decks himself, as he set a crown upon me. And as a bride adorns herself with jewels, so my God has adorned me. These words are said by priests as they put on their vestments before the divine liturgy. I always I'm in the altar getting dressed, and I'm thinking, and as a bride adorns herself with jewels, I was thinking, Jesus, I guess I'm dressing up like a bride. I like the bridegroom, he decks himself and he gets a crown. So that's a nice way to think of my Russian kamalavka, which I don't usually wear because they look so silly. And, it's hard to look at myself in the mirror with a kamalavka on and think anything serious. But this passage from Isaiah, my soul will rejoice in the Lord, for he has clothed me with the garments of salvation. This is Isaiah. What is he talking about? This good, thick Isaiah, Old Testament. The instinct of this passage is an instinct of spiritual clothing. No longer is it a garment of skin, a mere Flintstone outfit. The nakedness of our shame is being covered with a garment of salvation, a robe of righteousness. More than that, it's not just a garment or a robe, but includes crowns and jewels. It's wonderful. This is beyond mere covering, it's glorification. This is being clothed in glory, and we'll come back to that. But I want to bring another Bible verse to you from 1 Peter, nicely in the New Testament now, 5th chapter. He says, all of you be submissive, take the lower place to one another, and be clothed, he said, with humility. Peter says, be clothed with humility. He says, for God, he quotes the Old Testament here, God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And if you understand, I spoke earlier today, humility is simply our willingness to bear a little shame, the truth of ourselves in the presence of God, and frankly, in the presence of others, to bear a little shame. I know when I've started doing talks on this topic a few years ago, there's one inherent part of talking about shame. The temptation is to want to speak to you like an academic and give you clinical definitions and that sort of stuff. But I realize that's just such a boring way to do this. You won't like it and you won't learn anything. But I have learned in it, because I grew up as a class clown, was my way of handling those bullies. And if they laughed at me, it made me also imagine that perhaps they liked me. But part of being a clown is bearing some shame in front of people, allowing them to laugh if need be. And so, yes, I do tell stories and I bring laughter, but if you don't laugh, you won't listen on the topic of shame. Laughter can relieve a feeling of shame in its intensity. So, yes, it's such a complex thing and such a key and important emotion. Humility, the ability to bear a little shame, is, we're told here in Peter, it's a grace magnet. It attracts, it draws grace. It draws grace. God, it says, resist the proud, not because God is saying, ooh, you're proud, I don't like you. You know, it's because you can't do anything with a proud man. The pride stands not because it's a sin, but because it's a wall. It's a false identity. I mean, you know, I read somewhere, a little meme, that God can save the sinner that you are, but he cannot save the saint you pretend to be. Yeah? He can deal with, sinners, they're a dime a dozen. Been dealing with them since the beginning. It's the saints that we pretend to be. The proud man. He resists the proud because grace just bounces off the armor of pride. And it doesn't pierce the heart. Humility, a little shame. I mean, it's just really what's going on in the dynamic of confession. I mean, what are we doing when you come to confession? The worst understanding that I know of in confession is the sort of a mind that people have picked up out of the movies. I mean, that Hollywood would understand anything about the inner dynamics of confession, and so they portray it the wrong way. You get some Catholic priest in a box, you know, talking to someone, Father, you know, I did da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, you know, and say 5 Hail Marys and, you know, and 2 Our Fathers or something. It's just, you know, da-da-da. That's not about it. It is, we come, Father Saint Sophrony, in teaching Father Zacharias of Essex, a monastic who's really following in the footsteps of Saint Sophrony. He told him, he said, when he was first given the faculties for hearing confession as a young priest, he told him, he said, the young people and all, when they come to you, teach them, and he said, teach them to bear a little shame. He expanded on that and said, teach them that the important things for them to mention in confession are those things they feel shame about. That this is the importance, to reveal that about themselves. I was at Essex a couple of times, and Father Zacharias, who is from Crete or Cyprus, I can't remember. Crete, from Crete. There's a huge Cretan community in London, and pretty much on weekends at Essex, on Saturdays, there's 5 busloads of Cretans from London and elsewhere who pretty much think the only person in the entire British Isles who can hear their confession is Father Zacharias. And so they show up, busloads of them, and from early morning until late at night, he's hearing confessions. And I'm thinking, well, this is really healthy, all these people coming to share their shame. And I remember making my confession there. I waited to be last in line. It was well after midnight, and I go into this little chapel, in the oldest chapel there, and I made my confession. It was a pretty stupid confession. It wasn't really good. It wasn't really shameful. I really didn't know what to do with it. But, you know, stupid is also a version of shame, so I just did what I'm good at. And shared that, and he put his stole on my head, and read the prayer, and gave me absolution. Then he takes it off and puts it on me. He said, now, read the prayer over me. He said, this is how we do it on Mount Athos. And I thought, well, I felt even dumber and stupider as I read the prayer over him, just as, like he just revealed to me how utterly unworthy I am, and that my priesthood doesn't depend on me being worthy. It's just me reading the prayers. I have to say, he's probably the most humble man I have ever met. His humility is amazing, and the grace to be around him. But God gives grace to the humble. So Peter writes, "Therefore humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time, casting all your care upon him, for he cares for you." There's another priest in the British Isles, Romanian priest, Father Seraphim Alda, who is founder of the monastery on the Isle of Mull, near Iona on the west coast of Scotland, and first Orthodox monastery in Scotland for 1,000 years. And he's founded it. It's got a number of nuns there, doing a very good work. But of the same piece, he was greatly influenced by Essex as well before he did this. But he told me that his confessor in Romania, who was not a monastic priest but a parish priest, his priest there said, "When you come to me for confession, be sure to tell me things that you think will make me think less of you." All the things you don't want to talk about, things that will make me think less of you. This is really hard teaching people that come into the church, but frankly it'd be very hard teaching people in the church, because our instincts are to pull our punches in confession, to say things in confession like, "Well, actually I'm doing better, Father." I've told people that I'm here in confessions, "Don't ever tell me you're doing better, because you don't know what better is." I don't know what better is. I can't judge. You can't judge. Just tell me what you did. It's really hard. It's really uncomfortable. But, this is like I'm going to be pulling a splinter, out of you. And I know it's going to hurt a little. But you've got to let me touch the splinter. Go ahead and tell me. It's okay. We're working at being able to stand without shame or fear before the judgment seat of Christ. Share. Father Zacharias gave this definition of shame. He said he would describe shame as the lack of courage to see ourselves as God sees us. The lack of courage to see ourselves as God sees. Now, courage is a pretty loaded word. It can mean many things there, but it's to bring ourselves into the presence of God. I love that St. Peter describes us as being clothed with humility. This infers that we grow in courage to see ourselves as God sees us, and that we grow in being willing to bear with that vision of ourselves in the presence of other people. That's hard, to be who you are when you're with other people. I was interested when first time I went to Essex, and Sophroni's famous. He's buried there in Essex, and most of us who, have read his stuff and were aware of that community were wondering, when is the Patriarch of Constantinople going to canonize him? Why is he dragging his feet? And someone grumbled and say he's dragging his feet because Sophrony was a Russian, and stuff like that, silly things. And and you would talk to the monks and nuns there, and I expected them, because it's a double monastery of both monks and nuns, when are they going to canonize Sophrony? It was the one topic they had no interest in discussing at all. Not at all. I was surprised. I thought they would be like the pride of Essex. Our great saint, our founder. We don't know when they're going to canonize him, but it should have been yesterday or something like that. Instead, we don't know. Someday maybe. It doesn't matter. We know he's a saint. Ta-da. That's how that is. And now, several years ago, he was canonized, so he's Saint Sophrony. But the whole community practiced this humility, and we're not even boasting about their saint. Not even boasting about him. I think because they knew him, and his humility was clothing them. Clothed with the humility that he had taught them. I've been working on this concept of shame, researching, writing, and much harder than that, putting it into practice over the last 10 years. And it's changed a lot about me as a person in some ways, or at least revealed a lot to me about being who I am. But it's also changed a lot about my ministry as a priest, and especially as a confessor. Much of the conflict that we have in our lives, and certainly the conflict that we experience in the church, is rooted in unaddressed issues of shame. One of the things I would say as a generalization about confessions over the past near 10 years is anger. It's like people come in, it's almost the first topic they talk about when they come to confession. Father, I was angry, and da-da-da-da, and anger, and da-da-da-da, all these things about anger. And I thought, dang, these are really angry people. And we're an incredibly angry culture. I mean, if you're going to have Thanksgiving dinner, no politics, no religion, no sexuality, nothing. Just don't talk about this, because you'll be eating each other instead of the turkey. It's just the anger is there. And we use, I will say, we have increased the use of shaming language in our culture to a huge, huge level. Those we disagree with are not just someone who disagrees with me, and they're not just wrong, they're evil. They are evil. And many of the things that are discussed in our culture have been sort of turned into moral issues. Such if you disagree with me about, say the church's teaching on human sexuality, it's like you're not just wrong, you're evil. And if it's evil, you can do a lot of bad things to evil people and feel pretty good about yourself because it was evil. So we use this language, and it's shaming language. Our politicians now use little diminutive terms for their opponents and say all of this stuff, so it kind of become the style. And as we shame each other, we become angry. As I mentioned in the earlier talk, shame is so unbearable as an emotion, we will turn it into anger or sadness. And so most people walk around and they're either angry or they're sad. And if you're not angry or you're sad, I want to know what you're smoking. I don't know, or something. It's really, maybe Xanax, but it's a real temptation to be angry. But as I've worked with this and seen this in people, to try to work with them to help turn their focus away from their anger and back towards the real conflict in their lives, which is this conflict centered in shame. How I feel about myself. Or how, when I'm with you, how you make me feel about myself. I had a friend send me a note. Someone had been reading my book, and he said, how do you help with the experience of the shame you experience that your children haven't turned out like you wanted? I mean, all of my children turned out the way I wanted. This is being recorded. And I don't know if they'll watch it or not. I kind of thought to myself, dude, welcome to adulthood. They don't turn out necessarily the way you wanted. That's why you pray, and why we have hope that when we die, we can still pray. When we were becoming Orthodox, I remember kneeling in front of our family altar and praying, God, give me my children. I want their salvation. The youngest was 6, the oldest was 18 when we entered the church. And I prayed, oh God, give me my children. And it's one of these few times in my life I got an answer back, and he said, I will give you your children, but you won't see it in this life. That's not something you, as a parent, you don't get to see it in this life, because it's not done till they're dead. I don't know. It's another way of God saying to me, you don't know what their story is. I do. Their story's between me and them. And I'm working out their salvation from day to day. And let me do my work. Your job is to pray. Tell them about what is right and what is wrong. Love them, love them, love them. And pray, 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 which is why I'm glad I'm married to my wife, because someone had to do the prayer. And pray for them. Pray for them. My daughters describe their mother as a ninja prayer warrior. And so when they need something, they call their mother and say, would you pray? And I think that's actually raising them right. At least they know who to ask. But learning to go back to these things. But by the grace of God, we have the ability to live in a different way towards our shame. The healing of shame, especially toxic shame, is a very, very difficult work. If you've been the subject of abuse or really toxic kinds of treatment, and sometimes it doesn't have to look physical, it may just be psychological, it can be a lot of things. It can be teachers, it can be parents, it can be things that happen to us in our adulthood. All of these things that create this sort of toxic way of being inside ourselves. It's very hard to heal. It's very persistent. It also has ways of forming and shaping things in us that we don't know about. We haven't yet recognized. And so this is something that requires the work of the Holy Spirit in revealing the truth of it to us. I believe it's actually the most essential pastoral spiritual work of our time. And it's a long, slow job. God's treatment of shame, beginning with Adam and Eve and on throughout Scripture, is instructive. For Adam and Eve, he covers it. He covers their shame. He doesn't say, you know, Adam, you look really funny when you're naked. I mean, he doesn't do anything like that. He covers him. He doesn't even discuss it with them. Their shame and its vulnerability were not used against them. God does not use our shame against us. Neither should we use another person's shame against them. First off, it's really unfair to attack someone who has no armor. To attack someone at the zone of their shame is to attack them in their vulnerability, which is oftentimes when husbands and wives are fighting unfairly, you use that vulnerability, that thing you know, and it's just an instinctive thing to go for their point of weakness, and that point of weakness is usually a point of shame. Yeah, you'll win the fight. You'll lose the marriage. So why do you want to win? I've long thought the most important thing for me in my marriage was to lose, and to be a good loser. To be a good loser. Why not? I love her. I'd like to lose to her. She's gentle, kind, and she's here. And children, who can be more vulnerable than a child? They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing. And why would you want to use a weapon against them like that? If they don't know what they're doing, why would you do that to them? To shame them. To make a child feel that they're unworthy. To make a child feel that they're incompetent. Of course they're incompetent. They're children. The truth is they're way more competent in God's eyes than we are. They at least have the excuse of being children. Some years back, we were starting our mission. We had a couple of autistic children, very severe autistic children, whom their father brought into the church. And the teenage boy was just difficult behaviors, not so bad. His sister, though, would moon a lot and make noise and various stuff that way. When they first came to the mission, we were meeting in a storefront, and I was struggling. We weren't growing. And I remember they showed up, and there was a few weeks of this going on, and I was in the altar, and I prayed and said, Jesus, I'm trying to start a mission here. This is hard. I complained to him. And again, one of these things he spoke to me. He said, this is for your salvation. And over time, those two kids, I think, formed and shaped our mission to be welcoming. God sent them here, and who was I to know whether the entire purpose of our mission existing wasn't simply for these two children? How should I? Why not? He's that kind of God. He can do that sort of thing. And so we were patient. The behavior changed over the years. Their father is up to becoming a deacon here soon. God bless them. But I remember a man in my parish who had finally left the storefront, and we'd moved in and bought our own building. And he says to me, Father, can't we make a room for them? Right? Can't we have a room for them? Where they won't bother? I said, what do you mean? He said, well, when I try to pray, they distract me. When I'm in a monastery and visit and pray, he said, I can concentrate. And I said, who told you when you're in the monastery that you're actually praying? Who told you that? You think you're praying. You imagine yourself to look like a monk, and you're praying. But I can promise you that when they distract you here, their parents have them 24/7 unrelieved. 24/7. They haven't institutionalized them. They've kept them. They keep them 24/7, and they bring them to church. I said, if you, when you're distracted, if you pray for them, God will hear your prayer because He likes them more than He likes you. Scripture is very clear about this. Do not cause these little ones to stumble, Jesus says. It's better to have a millstone around your neck and be cast into the ocean than to cause these little ones to stumble. You pray for them. God will hear your prayer. He left my parish, but God forbid, though, God forbid that the parish be someplace that such children are not welcome, are not safe. You know, it judges us, not them. It judges us if we can't welcome and invite and nurture and support some people who have laid down their lives on a daily basis to care for these neediest of our citizens and their children, who actually, despite their shame, brought them to our church. What a wonderful thing. And found it finally, despite me and Jesus, my conversations with him, stayed and made us a better parish. Really made us a better parish. This is a part of bearing our shame. Mine, theirs, one another. And to protect them from those who would shame them further. We have a special room for people like you. God forbid, God forbid. And we have, by the grace of God, the power to live a different way. This healing work is difficult. God covers our shame, covers our vulnerability, doesn't use it against us. In our rather dangerous culture, shame and its vulnerability are used as convenient targets. We use it all the time. We think of ourselves as winning, but the wound of shame can carry on for years. I don't know about you, but I can remember shaming things said to me decades ago, from childhood. You probably have played those tapes in your head. There's the Antoretikos of Evagrius of Ponticus. It's his book on talking back to the inner thoughts. And what are the inner thoughts coming on? Well, you can always say it's demons, but it's probably just the echo of the voice of shaming to someone who sowed it in your head, and you hear it repeated, till it almost becomes a mantra and a way of being, and you start pretending to be someone else in order to avoid it. God gives us something better. So this is all very, very important. We think about our children and our youth. In their critical time of life, in our adolescence and teen years, it's a time when our identity, it's an interesting word, identity. Identity is pretty much all about shame. It's not really who you are, by the way. You, including you adults, you don't know who you are. Now you need to get this clear. This is scripture. I'm quoting the Bible at you. Okay? You don't know who you are. We hear in 1 John's letter, beloved, we are children of God, but it has not yet been revealed what we shall be. But we know that when He is revealed, that is when Christ is revealed, we shall be like Him, for we shall see Him as He is. You see, there's this vision. The shame has been removed, and I see Christ face to face and see who He is. Then I will be like Him. That's the truth of my being. I was created in His image and likeness. The truth of my being, and I've been pretending to be somebody else. I've been pretending to be a sinner. Took a really good job of it. But we get into these other ways of being. False identities are using. We weaponize identity now. Like my identity is like a protected species. You know, I belong to this protected group that's been, you know, marginalized and stuff like that. You know, I want to say, get over it. Everybody's been marginalized. You don't get a free ride. I did those DNA tests to find out who I was. And the test came back and said, basically, Britain, just British, with a slice of Scandinavian, which actually just means British because they invaded England in the 800s and left some DNA trails and stuff like that and changed a few words. But, you know, but I have Welsh ancestry, Scottish ancestry, English ancestry, Irish ancestry, and they all hate each other. And I mean, and only the Irish have a really good excuse because they were picked on by everybody more than the others. But, you know, I look at that and I think, well, I can't pick a side because I am all those sides. That's who I am. And that's kind of our story. That's the human story. I don't care where you're from, what your thing was. You've got some oppression in your background, if you want to claim it, you know. And you've got some oppressor in your background, if you want to claim it. It's just who we are. But today, in our culture, we can wrap ourselves in it, and you just won't find yourself. You won't find yourself. Identity with the group is not who you're going to wake up and see when you see Christ face to face. It's not who you are. St. Paul has similar words in Colossians 3. He says, set your mind on things above, not on things on the earth, for you died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. You don't know who you are. Your life is hidden. And if you want to know who you are, you've got to go find it in Jesus. That's where it is. Jesus has got it wrapped up and hidden. He'll show it to you later. But Paul says, when Christ, who is our life, appears, you also will appear with him in glory. Paul was such a Jew. I mean, he was a really, really good Jew. He writes about it. Galatians, he boasts about it. He said, considering the law, I was blameless, which is a way of saying I was a super Jew. I was really good at it. In fact, I was a Pharisee. I was so good at it, I persecuted the church. Concerning the law, I was blameless? Dude, that's serious stuff. And he says, I count all of it, I think we translate it as loss, for the excellency of knowing Christ. It's not loss. It's, I can't say it. My wife is here. So he just says it's nothing. It's less than nothing. I count it as nothing for the excellency of knowing Christ. The Paul who was, he says, I died. I'm crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live. That's who I am. You don't know who you are, but what matters is that you learn who in Christ you are becoming, who he's calling you to be. The truth of who we are, our true identity, not known in the present. And this is interesting to me because it throws my identity into the future that is coming to me. If I was speaking in theological terms, I would say your identity is eschatological. It is coming to you to be revealed at the coming of Christ, the truth of who you are, which is so much better than wasting time worrying about where you came from. Like that matters, you know? It doesn't. It becomes a false problem. A false problem. All of this is striking, I think, when St. John says we shall be like him, like Christ, for we shall see him as he is. To see Christ as he is a transforming experience every time it might happen in your life. To see Christ as it is, to see him changes you. In this life, as we struggle within ourselves, particularly when we struggle to present ourselves before Christ, such as in confession, we're participating in that transformation. To see Christ as he is an experience of healing. Now, we live in a culture of psychology, and I really, really hope nobody thinks my book is a psychology book, because it's not. It's got just enough psychology for you to think I know what I'm talking about. It's funny, ancient faith. This made me so nervous. I sent my manuscript in. And of course, I'm a published author, and I thought they'll give me a pass. No. And they sent my manuscript off to the woman who's the president of the Orthodox Counselors whatever organization, the organization of official therapists and stuff, and she was going to read it, and I sweated bullets. I thought, oh no. Because, I mean, you talk about being vulnerable, and she's going to get me on, this is really bad psychology. I thought, I have no defense, I'll have to rewrite, and I just waited and waited until they sent me a note and said, oh, she thought it was great. And I thought, oh, thank you, Jesus. So anyway, but it can matter. But in our psychologized society, when people want to do spiritual growth, oftentimes they do it by wanting to study themselves more and more. Like, if I only knew more about myself, I could be better. I'm thinking, how do you think you got to be so screwed up? You know, this is not something you're going to fix. It's not that if I could only see me. So we're this information society, and we have a mistaken notion that we are saved by information. If I only knew more. No, you can't know enough. It's not if I could only know more, it's if I could only do more. And the doing that matters in this is you need to know Jesus. You need to know Jesus. I know I sound like a Jesus freak, and I was one. I lived 2 years in a Jesus freak commune, and I know about being a Jesus freak, but I still am. You need to know Jesus. He is the image towards which we are being transformed. And the transformation comes in seeing him as he is. Goodness gracious, the Orthodox Church, we plaster pictures of him everywhere so that you won't make a mistake and think he's someone else. So that you can see him. He is there. He sees us. He sees all of this, and we keep coming back to it. And we're bathed in theology. I mean, a number of times, especially after I was a convert, in the choir singing away, and hypostasis this, and theology this, and just amazingly stuff. Our Orthodox hymns, it's like swimming in patristic theology. And a number of times I'd be in the altar and the choir's just going away, and I want to come out of the altar and go, whoa, wait a minute, what did you just say? I mean, they would say things that would just rattle my understanding. I mean, for the good. I just think, really? And I was thinking just this year, on Thomas Sunday after Pascha, one of the hymns, I think is on Lord I Call, it's just talking about the blessed doubt of Thomas. I thought, whoa, wait a minute. There was a sermon back there. Thomas blesses his doubt, because in Thomas's doubt, Christ is revealed. Touch me, stick your hand in my side. It blesses his doubt. Oh, we just swim in this theology. It's trying to teach us Jesus again and again and again. Our Orthodox faith bathes us in this understanding. God give us grace to hear it. But moments in this life, I want to add to this what I think are these very, very important moments in our life, sacramental moments that prefigure this transformation. And I'm going to think about them out loud with you. In baptism, ideally, as practiced with babies, they're naked. Ta-da! It's Adam and Eve. As we would say in my corner of Tennessee, they're buck naked. And, yep. And I was talking to a Russian recently, and I was talking about this naked thing. And they explained to me that when they got baptized in Russia, as an adult post-Soviet, the priest baptized her naked. I was surprised. And he said she was there, her husband was there, and his matryoshka was there. And I'm thinking, mine would have killed me. I don't care, And I was thinking, did nobody ever explain to the priest that you can wear like something to cover up with when you're baptized? You don't have to be naked like a baby. I mean, in the early church, they were naked, no doubt. But also in the early church, it was the primary role of women deaconesses, not to prove that women can do the same jobs men can do, but because the women getting baptized were naked. And it's just one of their jobs. They did the baptizing, then they put clothing on them, brought them out, and then they got chrismated. And I think if they ever restore women deaconesses and decide to do it, they better be ducking naked adults. But and if they're not going to do that, then don't go there. That's just my thoughts. But anyway, in baptism we come ideally naked, not a stitch, Nothing that, says who I am or anything like that. But we come naked, and then we're clothed with a robe of righteousness. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. We have a song for it. As many as have been baptized into Christ have put on Christ. In a visa there. And you've been dressed in Christ. He's my clothes. I put on my Jesus suit. I get baptized. I'm clothed in Christ. I like some churches, especially if they've had lots of converts, do put robes on their white robes on the newly baptized. I like that practice. In ancient Constantinople, it was said that the newly baptized would wear their white robe for a couple of weeks, who knows, 40 days or something. But as everybody would see them and know they were the newly baptized, they would rush to them to touch them for the grace of their baptism. Just like a kind of rock stars, newly baptized, want to touch them, being, clothed in marriage. We've reduced it to the level of putting a crown on you, but as I read from that passage in Isaiah, the crowning is part of it. So he has set a crown upon me, like a bridegroom. We crown them. I know in the Oriental Orthodox churches, like the Coptic Church, they also put a whole cape on the bride and groom. I like that too. That would just be fine. It's a robing that we're putting something on. Now, I mentioned that I have 3 daughters. I have 4 children. 3 of them are daughters. And I understand from that just how important the dress is in a wedding. And I've tried to warn bridegrooms, son, it's all about the dress. And I used to think it was sort of excessive, especially when you can drop $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 on a wedding dress. That's some serious stuff. I mean, I could understand if it was vestments. There's some really nice stuff. But the bride, my daughter that was 15 when she became Orthodox, the second girl, my first wedding, I went to Baltimore, Maryland, where Father Gregory Matthews Green was the priest. He was doing a wedding, and one of my parishioners was marrying one of his. And so he said, would you come up and we'll concelebrate the wedding? I thought, great, because I've never done an Orthodox wedding, and I want to watch and see how we do this. And suddenly my little 15-year-old said, Papa, I want to go. And I'm thinking, why? She says, I want to go too. I said, well, why? She goes, well, all of my life I have dreamed of my wedding. And now that I'm Orthodox, I don't know what it looks like. Well, how do you say no to that? Just come on, darling, we're going. And so we took her up. She got to watch this wonderful wedding. Really great, because the bride, both the bride and the groom were students at the Naval Academy. The bride was a Marine woman, and the husband was Navy. And the bride fainted during the wedding. I was impressed. Her roommate said, well, she always locked her knees and fainted when they were on parade at the academy. It was just great. She went down, and suddenly a bunch of Marine ladies pick her up and stood her back up. We watched how do you handle it when the bride faints. Father Gregory got us through that. But thinking about the wedding, what is it going on? Why is the dress important? Well, you could say, oh, it's a fashion statement. It is way so much more than fashion. What is going on with that? These kinds of symbols, if you look closely at them, they can tell you a lot about human beings. And it's not just Christians. All over the world, people think wedding's a big deal. Brides everywhere want to dress up somehow. I mean, American weddings are so cool that they've spread into foreign countries where this culture doesn't even belong. They want to look like an American bride because we've seen it in the movies. I mean, what does it go on? I think we long to be clothed upon, to put on a covering. I mean, every bride, I've done hundreds of weddings over the 40 some odd years of my ministry. I've never seen a bride who wasn't beautiful on her wedding day, no matter how she looked the rest of the time. Just beautiful. There's something radiant and transformative. Yeah, just radiant and transformative. She wants to put on that dress. She wants to be, Jesus describes the church as his eternal bride.
I mean, this has got deep stuff running in it. I mean, some little American girl shopping for a $5,000 gown doesn't realize she's wanting to put on the eternal bride of Christ, but she does. She does. I just have news for her. She's really marrying down when you look at her groom. But anyhow, that's sort of, but there's this. I got to quick tell you a Tennessee wedding story, just because I have ADD and I can't help it. Rabbit Trail. I was doing a wedding, Episcopal Church, third Saturday in October, which anyone in Tennessee with brains knows that's the game between Tennessee and Alabama. And it was in October, and it's that day, and they had scheduled the wedding to be late enough in that day that the game should have been done. It was being played down in Alabama, and Peyton Manning was the quarterback. We did stand a fairly good chance. He had shown them up bad the year before. Peyton is there, and the wedding is at 3 o'clock. The game had started early. It should have been over, and it was not. It had gone into overtime. It's 3 o'clock. I'm in the church. I'm ready for the wedding, and nobody is in the church. Just me and the organist. And I'm looking and wondering. He says, it's the game. It's not over. It's gone into overtime. And Peyton Manning lost to Alabama in overtime. That is the angriest wedding I have ever served in my life. Oh, it was kind of like, I do. I mean, really angry people. I never kept check on it whether or not that marriage survived, but it felt like it happened under a curse. Oh, mercy. Everybody, but I enjoyed that. Actually, it was worth it for the story I got out of it. That was just great. I mean, even the bride and groom were back up in the rooms up in the parish hall watching it on TV. I mean, gee whiz, Peyton, what a man. The service of ordination, and our few priests who are here will appreciate this and understand it. What a wonderful sacrament. Brides have no idea. No idea. You go in, just a human being, and you're standing before the altar, and the bishops pray these unbelievable prayers over you. Unbelievable prayers. And when it's done, he starts putting clothes on you. He starts dressing. And with each article of clothing, he holds it up, faces the congregation, and intones Axios. Even the Russians say Axios. I mean, he is worthy. And the congregation chants back, Axios, 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 and really loud. And I mean, it's an amazing experience to stand up in front of a congregation and have people singing that you're worthy. It's, and that was just the first cuff. He's gone on to the second and the epitrachelion and everything. Each article putting on you, he is worthy. And I kind of think, well, you'd better enjoy it because it's going to get bad after this. But anyway, they're not going to be shouting Axios. They'll be shouting, Anaxios, Anaxios. But the instinct of that sacrament, this is a vision. It is an eschatological event. The priest stands before the altar and is made a priest. There is actually only one priest, and that is Jesus Christ. He is our great high priest. All of the earthly priesthoods are priests in as much as we participate in his priesthood. It's his priesthood that we put on. That's why we wear these clothes. Is that you would understand this is an icon of Christ. This is Christ who stands there, which is a good reason to respect your priest, and the only reason we kiss their hands and call them Father, because it's respect to Christ, and they bear that burden, the burden of knowing no matter where they go, people look at them and expect Christ, and will judge them if they're not. And it's just hard. It's hard. I had the same kind of sympathy for the royals, who've got a really lousy system in England. But I was watching dear poor King Charles, and it's his coronation, which is sort of a kingly ordination, and they're putting clothes on him. And they're not saying Axios because the English would laugh. But, and there were people making fun of it and people standing outside saying, "Not my king," with signs and stuff. Just really hard. I just felt for him. I'm thinking, dude, it's hard enough to be a symbolic person. And you are too, like especially us adults. You are an adult. You are a parent. You are a mama. You are a father. You're a grandfather. Whatever. You image these things out. I once had a couple who was joining this Anglican church I was serving, and I was teaching, doing classes, and I started going into the moral teachings of the church, pretending that we had some. And anyway, I tried. But anyway, I'm telling this, and one of the guys was really honest, and he said, "What business is it of the church? My morality. What business is my morality to the church?" And which is a good question. And I had a good answer. I told him, I said, "It's very simple. You're raising my children. You're an adult. You don't get a free ride. Nobody does. Everybody is raising everybody's children in some level or another. We're all being watched. Nobody gets a free ride. You're raising my children. And if you don't want to raise my children right, you're not welcome here. You're damaged. You want to repent and become someone that I can say, look at him. Try to do it a little like that. This is our job as Christians. But we ordain these leaders and we put these wonderful garments on them like a bride and like a bridegroom. And we shout, "Axios." What a beautiful thing. So after a fashion, we could study all of the sacraments of the church and find a similar thing actually enacted in one way or another. For everything we do in the life of the church, we are putting off the old, that's not who I am, and putting on the new, that is refashioned in the image of Christ, reshaping me. We're putting off unrighteousness and putting on the righteousness of Christ. We're discovering that Christ himself is the healing of our shame. I think one of the great things about Jesus, everything's great about Jesus, excuse me, is his collection of disciples. I originally kind of thought that disciple was a Greek word for doofus. But, the apostles, in the New Testament, the Gospels are such honest books. The one thing we get from that is not only this information about Jesus, but them also telling the truth about themselves. We didn't get it. We were with him every day. We heard it, we saw it, we touched him, we watched him raise the dead, cast out demons, do all of this stuff, walk on water, and we were clueless. We were clueless, which gives hope to the rest of us. Okay, but this is how they spoke about themselves. Not just that, but Jesus traveled with a crowd of doofuses. Or is that doufoi? In the Greek, doufoi. And he travels, doufi, I guess, to use the modern pronunciation. Sorry, excuse my Britishness, doufi. So anyway, he travels with them, and he's seen with them, and they're always getting it wrong. He had nicknames for them, little tender nicknames. He calls them eligipisti, that is, little faiths. It's one word in Greek. It's not, "O ye of little faith." That sounds kind of nice. It's little faiths, all one word, little faiths. Eligipisti, you little guys, just little faiths, He loves us so, and he put up with them, their questions, and all of these things. He loves us so. God does not shame us. Christ puts himself on our side of the shame. This from 2 Corinthians. Paul writes and says, "For we know that if our earthly house," this tent, he means this body, this naked body. "We know that if our earthly house, this tent, is destroyed, we have a building from God." We've got another body coming. We have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. For in this we groan. I don't know about you, but as I'm turning 70 this year, I've almost got the groaning down pat. That's how I begin my day. It's my first prayer as I get up. In this, he says, we groan, earnestly desiring to be clothed with our habitation which is from heaven, if indeed, having been clothed, we shall not be found naked. This is the ultimate clothing, the resurrection. To be clothed in a body like the resurrection body of Jesus. This is my longing, and I long for it more and more, and I get closer. But we who are in this tent groan, being burdened, not, he says, that we want to be unclothed, but further clothed, for my nakedness to be covered, that mortality might be swallowed up by life. What a beautiful passage. He who has prepared us for this very thing is God, who has also given us the Spirit as a guarantee. This is usually read at funerals, and rightly so, but it's also a model for our daily existence. I want to be clothed. Jesus clothed me. I've carried my shame, and I'll share my nakedness with you, but clothe me. He has purposed to clothe us, not just covering my shame so that I'm kind of okay. He has purposed to clothe us in glory, that we might look like him. He puts bridal gowns on us. He dresses us as priests. He puts crowns and jewels on us. These wonderful virtues that are the very virtue of Christ. He crowns us with these things. We see this and celebrate it in the life of the church, in the saints he reveals to us, who are like kings and queens, or as Peter calls us, a royal priesthood. And we look at these, these dusty old priests monks living in caves and stuff, but like kings and queens and royalty. I was just reading, my bedtime reading recently was in the Venerable Bede, one of the great old English Orthodox saints, writes in the 700s, and he was telling about the death of this wonderful nun who had died. And they saw from the monastery, he was citing all these eyewitnesses, they saw a light going up to heaven. And they knew it was her soul being received by the angels. What a wonder that they got to see that. And of course, we've got plenty of stories like that in the lives of our saints. In my own life, in the story of my mother, I'm just glad to hear a story of someone said, I'm going to take you home. Come about 7 o'clock this evening, I'll take you home. And so that bride of Christ ascended into heaven and sits with him now, together with the other saints. Glory to God for all things. So that's my talk, second talk here of the day, and I hope that went okay. And we'll take a